Thank you for joining us today. The following presentation is from a webinar titled Successful Investing in Human Capital, originally produced on May 30th, 2013. The presenters are Greg Lowe with McKonly Asbury and Mark Pulaski with Cornerstone Advisors. Enjoy the presentation and visit us at www.macpas.com for future events and webinars.
Thank you, Reed. I appreciate that introduction. Just wanted to get started by just a brief introduction to myself. My name, as Reed mentioned, is Greg with McKonly Asbury. I serve as a Chief Operating Officer at the firm, as well as serve a number of our clients in our consulting practice, where we do a lot of things around human capital, including permanent placement and recruiting for our clients and other types of consulting in that area. And with me in the studio today is Mark Pulaski. Mark and I met early in 2012 as we found that we had some clients in common, and then began discussing human capital and some of the services that Mark offered to his clients. So I decided it'd be a great way to share some of information around a topic that we hear quite a bit about, that being assessments. But before we dive into that, I'd like to just first of all welcome you, Mark, and give us just a brief little bio about how in the world an accountant got involved in the assessment world.
It could be a long story, Greg, but good afternoon, everyone. I got involved with Cornerstone Advisors about 12 years ago. Cornerstone Advisors specializes in providing a variety of services to privately held businesses, including strategic planning services, very good at wealth transfer services, and human capital services. When I got there about 12 years ago, I found that they were very good at the wealth transfer piece of it, but the human capital and the strategic planning side really represented an opportunity for me to grow that aspect of the practice.
Well, today's topic, and something you and I have discussed quite a bit over the last year, is really the area of assessments. And I know assessments are something that you use quite a bit when you're consulting with clients. So let's just dive in at that point. Why should companies be discussing or even using or be worried about using assessments as they work with recruits or employees or human resource situations?
Well, Greg, the most important reason is that assessments can make your hiring practices more effective. We all have seen the significant cost of hiring mistakes, and the costs escalate as you move up the organization structure. So where you're talking about a CEO, for example, the cost of making a bad hire can be tremendous, as we have all seen on a national basis. So we firmly believe that assessments ought to be part of the regular mix. Of course, it's just one tool, and you need to conduct yourself properly throughout the hiring process, but it makes for a good cost-benefit decision. Unfortunately, too few companies do use assessments. I came across a study by Aberdeen consulting firm which indicated that while 74% of the respondents to their survey indicated that they wanted to improve the way in which they measure and grow talent, only 40% of those companies used assessments to help to identify high potential employees.
I know as we've talked through the years, you have sort of narrowed in on the KOLBE assessments, and I know that there's no one assessment tool that answers probably every question that we might have about a human resource situation, but let's dive in a little bit in detail today to the KOLBE assessment, which I know you spent a whole lot of your time with.
Right. You know, as you said, Greg, there's really no silver bullet when it comes to assessments. And our advice is to use as many as is practically and economically possible for you to use. Let me tell you a little about the KOLBE assessment. KOLBE was founded by Kathy KOLBE more than 25 years ago, and it's used by clients of all size throughout the world. Some notable clients are listed there. You can read them for your own. We being Cornerstone, got into the whole KOLBE process through the Hershey Company and a conversation between our respective CEOs. So we've been in it for quite a period of time. I have been working with KOLBE now for about 12 years. The central ideas to KOLBE are that it focuses on creative instincts. And in KOLBE's mind, it's the creative instincts of each and every one of us that kick in after we are motivated to take action. Accordingly, by understanding these creative instincts better, we'll be able to manage these energies properly, the end result of which should be better individual and better team performance. An important part is this. The KOLBE view of the mind is that there are three equal faculties within the mind. The first being the emotional side, in which is resident feelings and motivation, if you will, those things that we would commonly think of as associated with our personality. The second is the cognitive, or the intellectual component of the mind, in which is resident our IQ, our skills, knowledge, and the tremendous experience that we gain on the jobs. The third is the conative, or the instinctive side of the mind. This is the side that the KOLBE Index hones in on. KOLBE Index has nothing to do with the emotional side. It's not a personality test. It is not a cognitive test. So you can have two individuals with exactly the same profile, and if one individual has an IQ of 90 and the other IQ of 130, clearly you're going to get different job results out of those individuals.
Let me just ask you, Mark, we've used, in the firm here, we've used the Strength Finder assessment, and that's been pretty helpful for us identifying strengths of employees, where we try to match up employees where they're using their strengths the majority of the time as best as possible. We also use Myers-Briggs here, so we kind of have a cross-section between Strength Finders and Myers-Briggs that gives us a little bit more on the personality side primarily. And I was wondering if you could help, for those listening that may be familiar with those assessments or possibly not familiar with KOLBE, if you could give us kind of your perspective on the types of assessments that are out there and how they kind of compare and contrast, to trying to put KOLBE in perspective.
That's a very good question. In anticipation of this, what I put together is a slide, because I get this question quite a bit. Obviously, there are individuals out there, companies who use assessments, and I get the question of, well, where does KOLBE fit into things, and how does it, is it synergistic to use it in association with other kinds of assessment tools that we might employ? And this slide attempts to address it, using the three areas of the mind as the basis for the categorization among the different assessments. It's interesting to note that Kathy KOLBE's father was Edmund Wunderlich, the inventor or the discoverer of the Wunderlich test, which is on the cognitive side of things. You'll see that there are a variety of different tools out there. I put down the ones that I more commonly run into in the course of my practice. Caliper, for example, used heavily in the construction industry. You see a lot of DISC and Myers-Briggs. You see that StrengthsFinder occupies an interesting position in that it is primarily affective or personality in nature, but it does cross a little bit into the conative side, in my opinion, and hits some of the fact finder issues that we'll talk about a little later. But the KOLBE assessment occupies a unique position within the assessment array. Obviously, with all of these different assessments, what we're trying to do organizationally is to put our employees in the high performance zone. And that's that intersection of our conative or instinctive profile, along with the affective, the emotional side of the individual, the cognitive side of the individual, and the needs of the business. Obviously, if you have alignment in just the conative and the affective side without accomplishing anything as to the business, you are not in the high performance zone. It's these conative issues in KOLBE's view that are the ones that are more prone to keep you awake at night. They're thought to be the cause of burnout and reduced effectiveness. You know, if you go back to the 80s and think about that concept that came out primarily in the 80s, where we began to say someone's in the flow, if you will. What I think is that when someone is working in alignment with their conative profile, they are in the flow. KOLBE has worked extensively with Arizona State University in trying to take its assessment results into the actual brain activity. And what it has found is that the brain works far more efficiently when an individual is in alignment with the conative task. In fact, as you'll see on this slide, these are two views of two different brains. The top is one brain from different angles for an individual who is working in concert with their conative strengths. The bottom are actual pictures of the brain for an individual that's not working in concert with their conative strength. The red area constitutes that part of the brain that is active, and the size of the red area corresponds to the amount of energy that's being consumed. So KOLBE was able to take what it always thought to be the case, that you're operating at a lot less levels of energy when you're in alignment with your conative strength as compared to when you're not in alignment, and actually take that into actual brain activity. The characteristics of our creative instincts are that KOLBE believes that everybody has creative instincts. I'm sure we all know individuals that we think would not use the word creative energy in associating them with particular individuals. But remember what I said earlier, that the trigger point, if you will, for all behaviors is motivation. And in some cases, if the individual is not motivated to take action, you're not going to see a manifestation of their creative strengths. Our creative strengths are neither right nor wrong. You know, it depends on the nature of the task that an individual is being asked to complete. And as you would think to be the case, if we're able to actually take these things into actual brain activity, then it should stand to reason that our creative instincts are relatively ingrained and unchangeable. In fact, the KOLBE is able to say, and they test this all the time to come up with new ratios. I think when I first started using it, it was down around 92%, and now it's up to 96% test-retest. And what this means is that if we have one individual taking the assessment at two different points in time, in 96 out of 100 cases, we'll come back with the score being the same. There's typically a variance of maybe 1 on a scale of 1 to 10, but by and large, they come out pretty much the same, regardless of the amount of time that has elapsed between the assessments.
It's just a question, because this came up a couple of times where somebody takes a Myers-Briggs test or a strengths finder and they find themselves at, say, age 30 being very extroverted, but then 10 years later they retest and find out they're no longer an extrovert. They feel like they're an introvert. You're saying that the KOLBE testing, that's not as likely to occur, meaning if you test consistently, you're going to stay at approximately the same result that you had earlier on. You're not going to see that migration over time. Is that right?
That's actually, that's absolutely correct. In fact, you know, if you look at that book out that's now, and I'd encourage all of you to read it, it's called Quiet, which talks about the great benefits that introverts bring to the world. You know, what I find is that myself on the Myers-Briggs assessment, I came out heavily introverted, but I'm not that way at work. I'm more that way after work. And not only do we find that personalities are different, our on-the-job personality might be different than our off-the-job personality, but also our personalities tend to change over time, depending on life experiences and the like. KOLBE doesn't show that kind of variation. Correct.
Let's continue to dive in a little bit more on the detail of how you come about the KOLBE, the KOLBE system.
Okay, the creative instincts, and remember that's what we're focusing on, are represented by a person's blend of their KOLBE action modes. Not only was KOLBE able to trace the level of brain activity that I talked about before to the actual brain performance, but it also has found that each of the 4 conative action modes have individual patterns of brain activity. The most important use for you as employers for this assessment is that the KOLBE assessment is a proven predictor of job performance. And making that link to job performance is so important because after all, in the final analysis, what are we trying to do? We're trying to get our employees to perform, to behave the way that we want them to in order to accomplish the objectives of the organization.
You know, when we first started talking about assessments, we talked about the fact that our goal is to have an employee in a situation where they get to use their strengths most of the time. And that doesn't mean they get to use their strengths 100% of every day. For instance, not many employees probably find expense reports and the reporting of time and tracking of things like that to be their strengths or their favorite things, but at least most of the time. So we have people matched with areas where they can use their skills. And we find that they're more productive and they enjoy their job and their life a little better when that's a situation. Do you agree with that?
Totally agree. And it's unrealistic to expect that we have perfect alignment throughout the course of each and every day between the tasks that we're being asked to complete in our conative assessment. But rather what you're trying to achieve, Greg, is what you said, and that is a consistency over time. Let's try to get the majority of the things that we're asking for of our employees in alignment with their conative profile.
I'll tell you, when we were preparing for this webinar today, one of the most interesting and probably persuasive slides that you had prepared for today was this slide we're going to look at next, because I saw ways that we as an organization, as well as clients that we work with, they use a lot of these different means in order to predict how an employee is going to do either after being promoted or maybe prior to being hired, or just in all kinds of kind of assessment scenarios. So talk a little bit about this, what you believe is the validity of the KOLBE assessments as it relates to this chart and comparing other factors we may be tempted to use.
Sure. This represents the results of a study done by the Wall Street Journal back in the late 90s. I understand that it's being updated, but what they try to do is to look at various assessments, the KOLBE and the cognitive test score assessments, and a variety of other things in predicting job behavior. And as we all know, being in business for a period of time, that college grades, for example, are not very predictive of job performance. And for a lot of us, that's pretty good, being only 11% predictive. But at the top of the list at the time that the study was done was the KOLBE-A index at 0.82. Now these scores are R-square scores, so the highest score is 1.00. So with that being the case, you can see that the KOLBE-A index can get you about 82% of the way, but it is not perfect. No assessment is perfect. And you know, I like to look at assessments at different assessments as helping you to see the individual from different perspectives, such that the end result of compiling those different perspectives and the like gives you a more complete view of that individual. When it comes to hiring, what this slide tells me is you got to do a variety of things: reference checks, observe good interviewing techniques and the like, and also consider using various assessment tools to help you.
It's kind of interesting, but your point there that there's a cumulative benefit from linking multiple ways to assess together that is going to give you a closer to a 100% match, even though 100% match may be tough to strive for. If I use a assessment and I also have a live interview and I'm looking at their grades and the interest that they're expressing in the job, and I start combining all of those things, that offers me an opportunity to get closer to what I feel like would be a great decision as far as I could tell.
That's right. You're getting closer and closer, although, you know, in the final analysis, there's still going to be risk associated with making a bad decision. So you want to observe all of these different things and get as good as you can in executing them on a consistent basis.
Well, tell me a little bit more about the KOLBE action modes, and let's put some more detail around how they work.
Sure. The 4 KOLBE action modes are fact finder, which is trying to get at the individual's instinct to probe; follow through, the instinct to organize; quick start, to improvise; and implementor, to construct. More specifically, the fact finder score for an individual is dealing with detail, precision, and complexity. Fact finders typically work from the perspective of experience. So if they're faced with a problem, their tendency is to gather information on how that problem was solved in the past. Let's introduce some aspects of personality to this. Introverted fact finders are more prone to gather the information through research, reading books, looking at the web, or the like. Extroverts are more likely to call up friends or acquaintances that may have run into this problem in the past and talk to people more so than read books or do research on the web. The follow-through is dealing with structure, order, and closure, and it provides for focus and continuity. The quick start is dealing with originality, that sense of intuition and sense of vision. Quick start element focuses on the future and anticipates change. Now, when I say intuition, I don't mean intuition in a crystal ball kind of way, but rather individuals with higher quick start scores tend to have patterns of activity in their head such that when they begin to fill out that pattern, they quickly fill out the rest of the pattern. They don't have to go through all of the fact finding. And for others, that is what we see in terms of an individual with a high level of intuition. That's what we see occurring. On the implementer, it deals more with physical space and the ability to work with one's hands, with tools, and to create quality products that will endure.
It'd be easy, maybe helpful if you could give us a couple of charts to kind of tie all of these things together. And I know you have a couple of slides coming up here that do that related to the zones of operation.
Let's start with the actual scores. If an individual achieves a score of 1, 2, or 3, let's say, for example, in Fact Finder, that means that that individual will not be comfortable on a sustainable basis. Remember, anybody can do anything occasionally. What we're talking about, if that individual was charged with developing precision, dealing with complexity, doing analysis on a high percentage part of their job, they would not be comfortable doing that. Whereas the specialist, the 7 through 10, indicates the zone where an individual initiates in that area. The difference being 4, 5, 6 are the mid zones. Now, let's get a little more specific. As I said earlier, the KOLBE assessment, the utility of it is that it helps you to predict job behaviors. So exactly how would an individual with a 1, 2, or 3 score in Fact Finder perform versus an individual who would have a score of 7 through 10? Let's talk about, on the left side of the screen, the simplify mode. Look at the kinds of words that are used there: distill, condense, approximate, estimate. Whereas if you flip to the right-hand side of the screen, you're looking at researching in depth, establishing specific priorities, developing complex strategies, assessing probabilities. That's the span of Fact Finder. An individual with a middle score for Fact Finder would not be the one who would be comfortable doing the research, but rather is comfortable working with the results of the research. Shifting to follow-through. Remember, that deals with structure and order. An individual with follow-through scores of 1, 2, or 3 is what we find to be someone who's much more comfortable multitasking. They're able to keep several balls in the air, some of which hit the ground, but they're also able to, in fact, the lower the score, thrive on interruptions. They're able to do several things at once, and they are more flexible in switching tasks. I see, for example, that individuals with lower follow-through scores are able to pick up a task, and if they're interrupted, put it down, perhaps pick it up a week later, and not have as much startup time associated with resuming that task as compared to an individual who's more of a systematizer. The systematizers are those who are more prone to have to-do lists, love to work down the to-do list sequentially, do not like to be interrupted, and in fact, if they're in a position where they're frequently interrupted, many will close their door so that, quote, they can get their work done, quote. So clearly, one is not better than the other. Don't get me wrong here, but it depends on the nature of the task. If you had an individual who had a very high score in follow-through, 7 through 10, and you put them in a position where they're frequently interrupted, you are not going to find that that individual is happy with that position, nor will they be efficient with regard to the execution of those tasks. The quick start score on the low end are more of the individuals we would associate with protecting the status quo, if you will, sticking with what's familiar, challenging those who are initiating change, which is on the 7 through 10, the right-hand side of the equation. So the 1, 2, 3s are thought to be, in KOLBE's mind, more of the stabilizers within organizations. The 7 through 10s are those who are very comfortable in creating that sense of urgency within organizations, helping to initiate change, initiate innovation and experimentation. They're also very good at ad-libbing and telling stories, very good talkers. In fact, what I see pretty consistently, for example, is that when individuals are challenged with staking out new territory and new customers in the form of business development officers, they generally have scores in Quick Start in the 7 to 10 area, typically 7, 8. I don't see a lot of 10s in the work that I do in any one of these particular areas. Shifting to the final of the 4 action modes, the implementer, let me summarize it by this. If we were to have a motor that wasn't working and put it on the table, and we had a room full of people with different levels of implementer scores, the individuals at the lower hand would be very comfortable talking about why the motor wouldn't be working, whereas the individuals at the upper end would want to touch it, take it apart, work with their hands, use tools to find out exactly the cause. You also see that individuals with higher levels of implementer score are very good at working with their hands. They're very good at transportation and packaging. In fact, warehouse supervisors and managers tend to be higher in the implementer scores. Product demonstrators, the higher the score, the better. High scores in implementation in the implementer area are indicative of individuals who would be very comfortable in demonstrating a product multiple times a day, multiple days a week without getting tired of it. I also find, for example, that individuals with a safety consciousness tend to have at least mid to lower high-end scores on the implementer.
Let me just ask you this question. Mark, do you think when a company is trying to fill an open position that they have, do you think it's valid to take someone who is very, very successful at that role and enjoys it, they're using their strengths most of the time, and kind of take a look at the KOLBE assessment maybe for that individual, and then trying to hire specifically to that KOLBE result? You mentioned a warehouse person. They've already got one that is really great at their job. They love coming to work every day. They're the best one in the company at doing that. Is it valid to take their KOLBE assessment and sort of inform the recruiting process to say, let's assess all of the finalist candidates and let's look for a profile like this because we find this profile is very successful at that task? Or at that job?
Absolutely. And that's in fact one of the ways that the right fit, which is another KOLBE tool that I will get to a little later, works. But within organizations, as I have the opportunity to work across different levels of organization, I find that there are common signatures, for example, with positions, be they warehouse managers, supervisors, project superintendents, or project managers in construction, controllers versus CFOs or the like. And using your exemplars within an organization is certainly a key aspect of successfully using these tools.
Well, as you've covered these four, I know you have a chart coming up here. Let's flip to it now that kind of offers a good summary of those four areas.
Remember that we're dealing with three areas of within each of the action zones: the preventative, the accommodating, and the initiating zone. The scores of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7, 8, 9, 10. This chart captures, through the use of one word, which is difficult, and it doesn't say everything, but it gives you an idea as within each of those sectors of the action modes, what one word would best describe the strengths that that individual brings to the table.
It's a good chart for us to maybe come back to a reference if we need to for any of the questions that may come up at the end. Tell me a little bit more about some of the other KOLBE tools that you and I have talked about in the past, because KOLBE A was one of them. I know my first experience with that we can talk a little bit about later, but what other tools does KOLBE have and kind of how are they used and for what reason?
The KOLBE A index starts from the position of asking the individual to answer the questions as if the individual were free to be themselves. From the KOLBE A index, we can produce reports that include, for example, the Career MO report, which would show that KOLBE has done, I would guess by now, 1.5 million, a couple million different assessments. And what they've done is develop a composite of the different types of careers that an individual with each of the profiles would tend to find themselves involved in. The Sales MO report is an interesting report. There's no one perfect profile for anything, including sales activity. Clearly, it depends on the nature of the sale. Is it a complex sale? Is it a simple sale? The nature of the products that are being sold, the nature of the connection with the individual. Is it an established customer? Is it a new customer, or the like? But what the Sales MO report will give you for each of the KOLBE A indices that are done, the kinds of selling situations that individual would tend to excel at. The KOLBE A to A report, which is very helpful where you have individuals with disparate KOLBE assessments. It gives each of them a report on how best to work with the other individual. The KOLBE B is used to answer the question from the perspective, instead of answering the questions as if you were free to be yourself, you answer it from the standpoint of what does my job require? And it's very interesting how you get different misalignment between the KOLBE B results and the KOLBE A results. The KOLBE C is very useful in hiring individuals, new individuals, or promoting individuals. This is the report that I referred to earlier in answering Greg's question about the use of exemplars. KOLBE C will have the people who work, the exemplars, the individuals who work with a particular position, the supervisor of that position. It will ask each of those individuals to answer the questions as if the ideal candidate were taking the assessment. It gives you a good metric within an organization to see if everybody's looking at that new job from the same lens and resolve differences which are unfortunately common early in the process among how individuals view what the new individual to the organization, how they should be wired, if you will. Leadership analytics is looking at extensive reports, for example, an executive team, and Right Fit is taking the KOLBE A index for the job applicants. It's taking all of the KOLBE C results for the individuals that are evaluating it, and through a proprietary algorithm will give you a letter score from A to F in terms of, just from the KOLBE perspective, how good of a fit that individual would be for the job that they're being expected to perform.
Here's a miscellaneous personal question. Let me insert one of those. I have 4 sons. One of them is graduated or is in college now, completed his sophomore year. The next one in line just graduated high school. Would you think it's advisable for somebody to, and if so, which one of these KOLBE tools might you use with a high school senior that's trying to decide about major or about careers? Is that too early for somebody like that to take?
No, absolutely not too early. It's a great tool. In fact, I do that with friends of my children when they were high school seniors or college freshmen, and I'll do it for children of the clients that we have the privilege to work with, and help them to understand themselves better, because unfortunately a lot of us came out of high school or entered college not really understanding ourselves from an instinctive profile. And when I share with them the career MO results and the kinds of careers that they might be interested in on the basis of their KOLBE profile, it's amazing the kind of light bulbs that go off. KOLBE has nationwide, and they're starting out in the West, is trying to put the KOLBE into the school systems, and they've come up with youth indexes and the like at a cost of only $9 to put in the school system, to allow the guidance counselors to have yet another tool to help to coach the individual. So I think it's a great thing.
We have some questions starting to come in, and I want to I think maybe insert one of them now, and maybe a couple of these others we will wait towards the end. But this is a question. I have caution about using assessments, as some could consider them discriminatory. And I know you have content coming up here, so I'm going to advance to the next slide and let you go ahead and answer that one now.
Good question, and obviously an important concern. The KOLBE index has been tested numerous times and has been found to be non-discriminatory in terms of race, gender, or age. The Right Fit, the tool that I referred to earlier, meets and in fact exceeds the requirements for the EEOC, and KOLBE has tried to be very responsive to the standards that have been set for assessments by the American Psychological Association, and in fact it meets those particular standards.
I've always heard that topic talked about in sort of negative terms, because from the perspective of someone seeking a job, maybe they don't like the fact that maybe an assessment could limit their opportunity to get a job. They think that the company's looking for a certain thing, and if they don't come out a certain reading on an assessment, they may not get the job. But do you think it's fair to also say there's a positive side to that argument as well, that says if I hire an employee and put them in a job where they're not going to be able to use their strengths and ways of problem solving and dealing with facts, et cetera, the majority of the time, then they're not going to be long-term successful in that job. And maybe I've kept them in a way away from a job that would be a better match for them by hiring them into the wrong job. Do you think it's fair that there are two sides of that coin?
Oh, I absolutely think there are two sides to that coin. I think in the final analysis, risk is correlated with the effectiveness of your process. And if you try to, in the hiring process, utilize tools and past experience and good process in hiring people to achieve your results, I think you're reducing risk.
Okay. Mark, I know you've got a slide here coming up that talks about a little bit of a summary of why these assessments can be important. And I've got so far 3 questions lining up. I'm going to wait until the end to begin answering those. Why don't you just take us back with a summary about why companies can optimize performance using some of these tools?
Sure, Greg. When you look at the whole issue of performance, as I said before, performance within an organizational context, what you're trying to do is help the organization to optimize its performance. And these various assessment tools, be they the KOLBE assessment tools or the ones that you utilize in connection with personality testing or the like, I think cumulatively when you put these different tools together with other aspects of the process, it enables an organization to do a better job in hiring people. It gives people the freedom to be themselves. And as you see, to the extent that an individual is working in alignment with their creative instincts, they're consuming a lot less energy. They're not prone to burnout. They're happier at the end of the day, and they have a great deal more of job satisfaction. These tools are particularly good in building synergistic teams. You absolutely do not want to have everyone in your organization wired the same way. You also need to have it take thought in, for example, in the assembly of people that you use to do a project. Now that you're a little more comfortable, I hope, with some of the jargon, at the earlier stages of a project, for example, you want to make sure that you have individuals, some representation of a higher level of quick start in that project, to give you the sense, to create that sense of urgency, to bring that innovation and experimentation so you just don't end up with incremental gains within the organization. Clearly, as the organization is, as the project is formed and as it's managed, you want to have individuals with higher level of structure and order to create that project management discipline and ensure that we're sticking to it, et cetera, et cetera. So they're not only good with building teams in the sense of executive teams or management teams or work groups, but also project groups. I think they also reward, you can optimize performance by rewarding the consistent use of instinctive energy. It helps us to use our time more effectively and also to communicate among each other better. In many organizations in which I work, communications consistently shows up as an area for improvement, and the use of these kinds of tools can help you to communicate more effectively.
I got a couple of questions that have come in. I'm going to just take them sort of in the order that I've got them listed here. And the first question has to do with, I'm going to paraphrase it, but the question has to do with the fact that a lot of the presentation has been in the context of hiring. And you've touched on sort of team performance and sometimes staffing up for projects, trying to align a great team. But what about in situations where I got a struggling member of a team? I may have a team with 5 really high performing individuals that have performed well in every other area of the company, but now that I have them on a team working on a project, I find out that one individual or number of individuals are really struggling and things aren't working. Is there a place for these types of assessments in that environment? And a sort of part B to that question would be, what about in terms of promotion? When I have 2 candidates that are both doing really well in their job, but now one of them is going to be promoted perhaps to an open spot I have at a higher level. Is there room for assessment there in either of those cases?
Absolutely. Let's go back to the view of the mind, though, the 3 areas. If you have an individual who is struggling, where you have recurring people problems, if they're not recurring, quite honestly, what I find is that we as supervisors don't take enough time explaining to an individual why they're being asked to do something. We're very good at what and when and how we want it done, but we're not too good at why. But if you have recurring people problems, you got to go to the 3 areas of the mind. Your problem could be in 1 or 3 of those areas. It could be a cognitive problem. Maybe the individual just doesn't have the kind of skills or the level of knowledge or experience to be successful. That could be the source of it. It could be that the individual is not motivated to perform. And you got to look at that emotional side. The third area could be the CONATIVE area, which is where the KOLBE focus is. You may be asking an individual to do things that are not in alignment with how it is that they are wired. So yes, I think you want to look at that. In terms of employee promotions, you can use a variety of assessment tools to help you in that regard. Many individuals, for example, until they actually begin to work with the KOLBE, think such thoughts as the progression from a controller to a CFO is a natural progression. If you're a good controller for a period of time, you may be a good CFO candidate, whereas typically what we find is that the KOLBE profiles, the signatures that are common for those two positions are very different. The controller position signature is commonly fact finder follow through, whereas the CFO signature is commonly fact finder, still have to be the fact finder, but a mid-level of quick start. And they tend generally to have lower levels of follow through as compared to controller candidates. So if a CEO is looking, for example, for a strategic business partner, and you promote an individual controller to a CFO position who doesn't bring to the table that a little bit of quick start, many controllers are 1, 2, or 3 in the quick start area, I think you may be setting them up for failure. So that's another way that you can utilize those tools. I find the same thing, for example, in construction, where an individual will think that a good project superintendent in time may make a project manager, whereas they're very different kind of KOLBE profiles.
Let me just ask you, when we first started talking about KOLBE, and I was trying to understand a little bit, you suggested that maybe I just take an assessment for myself and then see if it was representative, or at least what I know about myself, to the extent that I can, understand my own strengths and weaknesses. Is that a valid way for somebody to, in addition to what you presented today, is that a valid way for somebody to get a quick study on how an assessment might work? I believe you had me take the KOLBE A assessment.
Yes, I had you take the KOLBE A assessment, and yes, it's a great way, because if I'm going into an organization and trying to get people to utilize this kind of tool, and if they haven't taken the index, it makes it hard to explain what it actually is. So my recommendation is jump in and take the index. You don't need me to do that. You can go online to www.kolbe.com and do the index for yourself. Obviously, you're not going to get the kind of interpretation that comes through certified KOLBE specialists like myself, but as a starting point, that might be a good starting point for you to use.
I will say, having taken it and then reviewing it and talking with you a little bit about it, it was representative for those people listening, and I let a couple other people read it as well, and they thought, hey, that thing's got you pegged pretty well. So it was a good way for me, at least, to understand it. Here's a good Central Pennsylvania question that's come in. How much, Mark, how much is it going to cost me to get a KOLBE assessment in my organization? Maybe you can kind of talk about the range of pricing, because I know there were different ones that you mentioned, but give me a rough idea.
Sure. To do a KOLBE A index, I say that you can jump online and do it yourself for a cost of about $40. When we do a KOLBE A index assessment, we're reporting other things. We're giving you the career MO, which you would have to pay for separately. Plus, we're giving you some interpretation. And our cost, for example, to give you an idea, is roughly about $100 or less for these tools. They're in the context of hiring or making major promotion decisions, it's relatively inexpensive. Now, when you get to the leadership team, because there are multiple individuals involved, we're doing KOLBE A's, KOLBE B's, KOLBE C's, and providing a report to the executive team that is roughly 70 pages long, full of a lot of interesting information. That cost for a representative executive team could be up around $3,000 or so. But for the KOLBE A index or the like, relatively inexpensive in the context in which we're talking about them.
A couple other questions have come up here, again, specific to the online cost. If a person just wants to go online and take it themselves, but not have the sort of interpretation from a certified person like yourself, that's, you said, around $40, is that right?
Yeah, I think it's $39.95 or something like that online. There's also other tools out there that I didn't get into that really don't have relevance. For example, there are relationship tests out there. So you and your significant other could go in and take KOLBE indices and get helpful relationship reports. There's also a youth index. We talked about college or high school seniors or the like doing the KOLBE. Even for younger children, these questions are asked in different way, like peanut butter and jelly sandwiches and the like. And you could do a youth index at an earlier age than a high school senior to help your children or relatives to understand themselves a little bit better. The KOLBE index is roughly about 30 questions, 35 questions. StrengthsFinder, I think, was 100. I took it at 180 or something like that. KOLBE's roughly 35 questions, and you can get through them, through the assessment in roughly about 20, 25 minutes. So you're not asking people to take a major chunk of their day to complete the assessment. It's interesting because your reaction when you take it might be like my reaction was, man, I don't understand how they're going to get anything useful out of my answers to these questions. But I was amazed, just like Greg said, that what he found is that it did fit.
Well, we got the contact slide back up for both of us. If you have anybody that's listening, there's a few questions that we'll probably just address here via email. But should you have any other more specific questions that you want to discuss offline, you're welcome to email myself. Mark's contact information is up here as well. Be happy to address any of those questions. I want to thank Mark for his time today in our little studio here and for the time he spent enlightening us a little bit about assessments in general and the KOLBE set of assessments in particular. Mark, thanks so much for being with us.
Greg, my pleasure, and thank you to all of you for taking time out of your day to learn a little bit more about employee assessments. Okay.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you once again for joining us for this presentation produced by McKonly Asbury, Certified Public Accountants. We hope you join us and participate in our upcoming events. You can stay up to date with news and learn about our upcoming events by visiting us online at www.macpas.com. Thanks again and have a great day.